um, the 10 most meaningful questions you can ask during donor visits. So before we start talking about the types of questions you want to ask, let's focus on some strategies as how to maximize the answers you're going to get. So it's really, really important that during visits, when you're asking those kinds of questions, you really listen and pay attention to the donor's body language, to the language that they use, and try to remember as much of it as possible. Um, Try to ask questions that are reflective in nature and are making donors think. So you want to avoid yes or no questions in this kind of environment. So leave things a little more vague and open-ended and see where the donor takes you. You want to show genuine interest in their interests, in their background, and work that they do. So find what they're really passionate about and get them talking, regardless of whether that's connected to your organization or not. Encourage them to tell you their story, particularly if they're older. Their life story will usually give you some ideas as to, the most pivotal moments in their life that shape the way they think and led to their success. And that could be very informative for the way you cultivate and engage with them later. And use the yes and or then what happened approach to follow up and dig a little deeper when they give you answers to questions. And so here are some ideas of questions. This is not an exhaustive list. You're not going to get a chance to ask all 10 in every meeting. So don't aim for that, but aim to identify the ones that you really need the answer to in every meeting so that you can have clear takeaways after an interaction with the donor. So for qualification calls in that first kind of meeting, how did you become engaged with our organization is a good question. Pay attention to any names and dates or occasions that they might mention and take note of those aha or first look moments where they first heard about the organization or they were impressed by something that the organization may have done. What inspired you to give and why do you give is a really important question to ask to really understand their motivation behind giving. Keep in mind that a lot of donors may be caught off guard by this kind of question and they don't always know, or they will give you a very simple answer, and that's okay, but sometimes they'll give you really the nugget that you need in order to move the relationship forward. So pay attention to the way that they express their decision-making process and how aware they are of how they make decisions. A lot of times when you ask them why do they give, they might say because you ask. So you may have to have a follow-up and dig a little deeper, but this will give you an opportunity to gauge their awareness as to whether the gifts that they're making to your organization are transactional in nature or whether there is a lot more thought or emotion behind it. Do you prefer to impact one individual profoundly or as many as possible? This is a really important question to ask later on in cultivation meetings as you start talking about potential asks in the future. So I think it's important to identify whether they're the type of person that really wants to focus the giving on one individual or whether they're the type of person that wants to sort of spread the love around to as many people as possible, even if the impact is not as deep as it could be on one individual. So an example of how that could be translated into a giving scenario is if you have a donor that prefers to impact one individual profoundly, let's say you might ask them for a $10,000 scholarship to go to one student. But if you have the type of donor that is interested in impacting as many people as possible, even with just a little, they might opt out and do 10 $1,000 scholarships. And that's just how they see impact. So it's important to understand their motivation so that you know how to position your asks in the future. So some more questions you can ask. How do you like to be kept in the loop or in touch or engaged? This will give an idea of what their preferred communications methods are, whether they are phone people, whether they're email people, whether they like your newsletters or they don't, whether they prefer in-person meetings or events or public speaking. It's just in general, all of these activities. I think this is important to ask so that you understand how they operate and then you can customize your communication based on their preferred methods. What other organizations are you involved with? This is a good question to ask. One, to identify who else they might be interested in and how many other organizations they are being engaged with. And then you might also be able to find some alignment in interest. So for example, if they are interested in healthcare and education, then, and you happen to be the healthcare charity, it gives you an opportunity to also look at programming that you might have that touches on both of those categories. Same with if you're interested in mental health and social services, then it gives you an opportunity to find a program that you might have that touches on mental health of disadvantaged individuals, for example. So look for those kinds of alignments that you can make between multiple organizations as an indicator of their interests. Another question is, what are your impressions of our organization? This is a good question to ask. You have to be prepared for their feedback, regardless of whether it's positive or negative. This will give you an idea of how aware they are of what you do and whether there's something in your programming or someone in particular that they might like or dislike. And then that will help you navigate how you engage with them in the future. Have you ever met so-and-so? I like to use that question a lot because it gives you an opportunity to open the door for future meetings. So if it's someone that's fairly prominent and you think that they might benefit from meeting a program staff person or the CEO, then it gives you an opportunity to say, have you ever met one of our staff? Or have you ever met our president? And if they say no, then it gives you an opportunity to follow up and schedule that meeting. And if they say yes, then that can be easily followed up with what were your impressions, and then sort of dig a little deeper, and then you'll understand what kind of interactions they may have had with the organization already. Could you see yourself joining our board or becoming more engaged with us? I think it's important to ask this question so that you can understand whether they're in a position to engage with your organization. Sometimes journalists could say, you know what, the next few years are going to be really busy. I'm going to focus on my business. I may not have an opportunity to engage very much. So then there's no point of developing a cultivation plan that has the person joining the board if that's something that they're not interested in. I would say don't offer the board option very easily unless you're really certain that you want those people on the board. Leave that for the select few, but give them opportunities to become more engaged and then identify how they can do that best. Okay, what part of our work are you most interested in? Very straightforward question. You really want to ask that question whenever you can, particularly if you work for a large organization or you have several different kinds of programming. You want to identify where their passion lies because that will help you with your future asks and how you cultivate them as well. Tell me more about, and then this is where you really want to dig into their personal story. So tell me more about how you met. If you know their spouse is an important part of the conversation, or tell me more about how you started your business or your career or how you moved to whatever local area you're currently in if they're not local. So these are all good questions to find out a little more about them and their background. People love talking about themselves, so get them talking as much as you can. So these are 10 questions that you can ask that give you a good foundation and starting base for conversations. And it can take, any one of those questions can take half hour to answer. So don't feel pressure to ask all 10, but it gives you an opportunity to start building an arsenal of questions that will really dig deeper on your donors' motivations and engagement with your organization.